Hello and welcome to another session of Great Shouts, Marketing and Growth Interviews. I'm Ed Davidson. I'm a fractional head of marketing. And this series and these sessions are all about how a startup moves to a scale-up phase and all around kind of the marketing and growth and how the bits kind of involved there. We hope it's really useful to CEOs and founders that are going through the process. And I'm interviewing business owners and marketers that have been through that process and seen it in action. And today we've got Paul Finch. So Paul, good to see you.
Hi Ed, how you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. Great if we could give a bit of an introduction and then we'll crack on with the questions.
Yeah, so I'm Paul. I'm one of the founders of Growth Studio. We do two things. Fundamentally, we're best known as a startup accelerator. So we work with early stage, predominantly technologies in the fields of technologies that prevent climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. We also help large organizations who have a vested interest in working with startups understand how to innovate, how to work with startups. And just in terms of context, we've worked with it's just under 1,000 startups now around the world across every field. We're on our 73rd or 74th startup accelerator cohort, and too many countries to count. But yeah, we've been around a while.
Amazing. We'll nearly get to that kind of 75th then. That's presumably a bit of a milestone for you, right?
It will be good. It will be good. I think I'll probably crawl towards it. It's been fun, but it's obviously tiring, and the amount of emotions and passion that get into every single cohort. But yeah, long may they last.
Amazing. All right, great stuff. So great, let's get stuck in then. So I suppose the first question I asked is the kind of baseline, how the kind of thinking is between kind of startup to scale up. So how do you kind of define when you think a startup is moving into a scale up phase?
I think for me, as soon as a startup has got the right indicators of product market fit, so they've got consistent growth, consistent revenue coming in, they know roughly what their operational margins are, what their profit margins, and who their customer is. So a lot of the assumptions and unknowns that you have as a startup, as soon as they start to become a bit more solidified. And then for me, when you can start putting money into that company, and a lot of those base metrics are stable, and you just know for every 100,000 million pounds I put in, you have a rough idea of what you can get back. That to me is when they're starting to get into scale up stage. They've defined their market, they've defined what they need to get into that market and how to grow. I think for me, the startup is still very much feeling your way around who your customer is, what they need, what your product is, what your pricing model is. So it's about validating and eliminating all the assumptions that make up your business.
Makes sense. And do you think those kind of KPIs, those measurements change over time before you start moving to a scale up? Or is there like a North Star that you're kind of working towards, and then when you've achieved that, then you can start building out the other kind of suite of KPIs?
Yeah, absolutely. They've got to always evolve. I think for very early stage, it's just about validating your market, and your KPIs are about who they are, whether or not your proposition hits the type of customer you think you're selling to. I think for startups, it's much more around revenue, profit, growth. But as you start to get into the scale up, then everything changes. Your culture changes, your costs change, your management team change, the entire company changes. So you've got to refine your KPIs and your metrics that go to that. So I think for me, scale up, so when you're going into that expansive growth stage, and you've got to have a fairly ambitious North Star. But with startups, I think you're still trying to work out where your growth potential comes from.
Yeah. And I suppose you mentioned kind of growth there.
Yeah.
The kind of channels that you see in terms of your cohorts that are being used, do you kind of naturally see with those channels that there's a channel market fit that's required, and there's like one channel that's delivering the 80%, or is it
Yeah,
try and have everything and try and work it out?
I think so. I think for the challenge we have with a lot of people that we work with is that they've got the early stage. They may have just done a friends and families round or a seed round. They have a lot of things to pay for, not very much time, and potentially not all the expertise they need in a business. And so oftentimes the channel they're still trying to explore which channels work. I think they either go through knocking on people's doors or digital channels. But you can only afford to explore on 1 or 2 or 3 maximum channels, I think, at the very early stage. You get some growth, you get some traction, and then I think people tend to assume that that is their channel of growth. Whereas I think once you then start to be able to afford a marketeer or a salesperson, then obviously you've got more channels available to you and potentially your markets change as well. So I think trying to find the market that works in the short term is really important. And I think one thing we often see as well is that people give up channels way before they should. So people will experiment on I don't know, on Meta, on Google. They'll try PR as an example, and if they're not getting immediate results, they tend to move on from them fairly quickly. And I think that's one of the challenges we face, is that there are some channels you just need to experiment. You need to invest a lot of time to get it right. And oftentimes you need to put a bit more money than you have into getting them right. So it does take patience, which is really hard when your cash flow is sinking day in, day out, and you need immediate returns. So yeah, I think definitely at that growth stage, understanding what markets do what for your business in terms of new customers, retaining customers, that's definitely a scale up thing, for want of a better word.
Yeah, I think as well as that kind of the media mix or this kind of channels mix, there's certain channels that take a little bit more time to reach fruition, right? So if you're investing in something like SEO, it's going to take a little bit longer to build up, but it's more evergreen. So it's going to help reduce your CAC overall, right? But
Yeah,
you have time to be able to get there. I think that the other part of it as well is, you might try on a channel, but as you say, the execution might be poor, or maybe the messaging isn't right for that channel. I don't know if you've kind of seen that.
yeah, we've seen that a lot. And I mean, I've been working with three different startups this morning, and trying to convey that SEO is going to be your friend and you should invest in it now, but you probably won't see any results for a minimum 6, 7, 8 months. It's really hard, because if you've got 1,000 things to do, looking at your backlink strategies, looking at your content, looking at your Hrefs, doesn't feel front of mind. And so it's making time for something that you're probably not going to be building up or getting. Sorry, it's quite difficult to try and make time to invest in something now when you're not probably going to see anything measurable for a few weeks or a few months. And you've got to be always on. That's one challenge we always have, is invest in SEO now and keep at it. PR is another one where it can be incredibly useful for early stage startups, and yet I would say 95% of PR relationships go south with early stage startups because they don't know how to brief or use PR properly. I think a lot of the PR companies and PR professionals out there have got very good intentions with working with startups, but maybe aren't activating the right type of PR that startups and founders need. There's only a handful of PR people I think I'd ever recommend to startups. I've seen people test it, fail at it, and never use it again, which is a real shame. But it can be a really good weapon for early stage startups. And then obviously with Meta changing their algorithms on an almost weekly basis, it's really hard for people to be dependent on their Facebook ads, because suddenly the cost for acquisition goes through the roof and spikes, and isn't quite the tool it used to be a handful of years ago. So yeah, it's tough trying to work out what channels to use and how to use them.
Yeah, I think sometimes as well that, I suppose the opposite of an SEO situation that compounds over time. Sometimes PR, it can be like magnesium, where it burns super bright, right, for a period of time, and then you don't have anything. But it's those lead to other things and other relationships and other things like that obviously are kind of beneficial outside of just the awareness piece for that period of time.
Yeah, and we always say that if you're starting PR, I think you need a 3-month runway in order for the PR person to really understand what you're about, what the opportunities are, how to sell you in. Very few people are going to care about your product or your new product launch or the thing that your thing does. I think you need to be a good PR person, be really creative about building your profile, building your story, and then be able to pitch that in. And it compounds over time. There are certainly startup founders that we all know who seem to be ever present, but that takes time and investment to go in. I think oftentimes with PR, people will ring up going, I've got a launch in 2 weeks' time, or I've got a big story in 2 weeks' time. It's not enough run room. I think similar to the SEO, you need 5 or 6 months at it before you start seeing some reasonable results. And all the time for startups, particularly, oftentimes you're still refining your proposition, you're still refining your markets, you're still refining everything that you're trying to sell. So I think with scale ups, they often have an easier ride at maintaining their effort in a particular channel because they've got a lot fewer assumptions as to who they are and who they're trying to target.
Yeah, makes sense. Where do you kind of advise or kind of see the benefit of the brand there outside of direct response? Because obviously, investors want to see those kind of unit economics, so they want to see, spend X to get Y.
Yeah.
But we all kind of know that either a value proposition or a brand has an element to that, and as you build the brand up, those metrics become a bit easier. Where do you kind of see that in the startup to scale up, and when it's best to be applied?
Yeah, I was having a very lively conversation about this yesterday, actually. So I think that there's 2 or 3 different types of founders. I think there are some founders that immediately understand brand, the power of brand, the power of your mission, and they build that first and almost the products around it. And I think they sometimes have an easier journey because they understand consistency of comms. They understand that you're not always trying to sell your thing necessarily as a direct response. It's more ethereal than that. I think most of the people we work with, being product people, engineers, tech people, sustainability or air quality professors, people who really are in that technology to save the world space. Oftentimes you talk about brand and it's not something they've really considered or paid too much attention. And I think we take a very pragmatic view for the people that we work with, in a sense that you've got to focus on your value proposition first. You've got to really understand the 3, 4, 5 segments that you're selling to, how you sell to them, and what levers you can use for each of those, because they might be quite different. Understand that first. And then once you can start to get some traction and really hear what resonates and learn what resonates with your market, then you can start to think a bit more about brand. I think for us, you need to think about your mission, why you exist, and what is it the compounding value that people have on all of the touch points that you give them relates to, and hence how you can build a brand. But I think to get through the early stages, you've got to have sales, you've got to get your target audience right, and if you can get some traction, you can get investment. If you get investment, then you can invest in a bit more of the brand-led thing. If you've got a startup that knows about brand, great, because I think there are some channels that really help that. But earlier stage, I think it's we always say focus on your value prop first, and then do brand justice when you can afford to do it and have the resources to do it. It does help, of course it does, but not everyone has the capacity to do it.
Yeah, I think that that's the interesting thing around kind of the value prop that potentially may evolve over time as the company potentially pivots slightly or kind of changes the kind of market, or even has like a core group of early adopters, and then it kind of goes up and needs to get a bit broader and kind of to encompass that. So as the mission and the vision should stay pretty strong, but that kind of that value prop evolves. I think the interesting thing in the conversations I've had with my clients recently is I suppose around that kind of category creation, or they think that they're in a unique space there, versus you really need to say what problem they're kind of solving, right? And it's like classic, like, is it a painkiller that you've got with a pain point? So yeah, I suppose interesting if you've seen that category creation element.
I'm sure we have. I think we've worked with a lot of people that believe that they're creating a new category or that they've got something brand new. It's rare that we see that someone's created something really unique. I think because it's probably been done somewhere before, and anytime a startup comes to us and goes, we're the only person that does X, usually within 8 seconds on Google, you've kind of floored it. So sorry, the question was then what's the influence of brand on category creation?
Yeah.
It can definitely support it, I think, but I think you need to, whenever you're looking at category creation or doing something clever with brand, it's got to be grounded in customer or consumer insight first. It can be done. I can't think of any good examples or any bad
Yeah.
examples how it's been done.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
probably want to be about 3 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. And all that.
All right. So as I was moving on then to how you kind of see teams evolve over time from like a startup to a scale up, what's your kind of recommendations there? Often it's a founder, a co-founder, it's a scrappy kind of early stages of the team, and then things evolve. How do you kind of recommend kind of that stacks over time?
I think the things that we always default to is first, if you're in a co-founder, well, if you're a solo founder or co-founder team, first really consider and have honest, truthful conversations with your team and your co-founder around what the type of business is you want to be and why you're into it. And it's amazing how few people do. And even myself, my co-founder, didn't really have those conversations early on. But oftentimes we see quite early where there's potential tensions that the co-founders aren't really aware of, because one might want a quick exit, the other one, might be on a mission to save the world, and founder three might want to build a large company and manage 3, 4, 500 people. So I think really understanding what your growth, what the company might look like in 3, 5, 7, 9 years, and whether or not that excites you as an individual is really important. If you want a quick exit, fine, build a company for quick exit. If you want to build a £300 organization, that changes everything. I think the other one is know your strengths. For the people that we work with, you get some founders that are brilliant at creating a new thing or defining a problem or building, starting a solution that no one's done before. You get founders that are brilliant at raising money, but maybe not running a business. You get the operational founders that are good at getting a problem and molding them into play. And I think as your startup evolves from sitting in a proverbial garage or a coffee shop to getting some seed investment to suddenly building a team, you've got to understand the type of founder you are and where your strengths are. Oftentimes you can be brilliant when you've got 5 people, you can be crap when you've got 15, 20, 30 people. At 5, 6, 7 people, the minute you start recruiting, everything in your company changes. At 20 or 30 people, everything changes. Your governance, your structure, your payroll, your operations. And I think you need to be really clear as how you're going to grow and make sure you've got the right support around you so you know what to do. And I think that is one thing that people don't necessarily realize, is that the ideas person might suddenly be responsible for 20 people underneath them. So try and plot out early, every time you get investment, or if you do well, who else can you bring in the business? What can you delegate out to? And I think when you're early stage, you have to do everything yourself. It's very difficult to relinquish control. And actually, if you think about what eats up your entire week as a percentage, suddenly you can start to see that actually the 15% I'm spending on sales calls, I could be doing on something else, or the 20% on fulfillment. Actually, there's more value to you as a founder being able to reallocate yourself and your time elsewhere. So it's everything has to change, everything has to grow, and you've got to be aware of that fairly early on, I think.
Do you see any kind of natural structure where new hires are brought in with particular departments, or is it very much it depends on the type of organization? Or are you like B2B versus B2C? Is there a particular like natural kind of growth to the team?
Yeah, I mean, I think with B2C, I think the other red flag which I saw this morning, oftentimes when I see pitch decks and we see 20, 30 a week and people asking for money, and you go to like slide 12 and you've got your pie chart of how much money you're looking for and where that's going to spend, where that's going to go. I think one of the bigger red flags for me is that people don't put enough sales and marketing budget in there. So if you're a B2B company, the allocation of marketing and sales might be quite different than if you're building a D2C company. I think for a DTC company, early on, you need to get really good marketeers, really good digital performance people, a brand person, and those might be some of your early hires, because that's what you need to crush really early on to build your business. I think with B2B, oftentimes it might be more of technology or tech people that you bring in to build your product first, and then maybe a salesperson, and then maybe the branding people come later. I think sales and marketing, particularly British people, we're shit at sales, I think, compared to the other markets that we work with. I think people will build the thing and then hope that it sells. And I think, again, our American friends and some of the other markets in the Middle East, they're really good at selling. And I don't think that's necessarily ingrained in a lot of founders that we work with in the UK. And so I think one of the first hires I think you should get is a reasonable salesperson, because if you can go and generate demand, then it's a lot easier to get investment. And it's a nice problem to have if you get an order that you can't necessarily fulfill yet. You can find ways and means to do it. I think people get sales and marketing in far too late. The other mistake that I often see, and certainly we made, is when we were starting out, we could never afford really experienced people. So we invested in the best people we could, but were quite junior, with a view that they would, that we could train them up and, we'd over time really get our money back. And I think that's a really false economy, because the reality is we've often been a startup ourselves, never have time to train people, never given them the focus they need. And I think last year we started bringing in really experienced people. It's been game changing for our business. So rather than scrimp on people, try and get the best people you can afford, even if that's a freelancer and even if it's 3 days a week versus 5 days a week. Oftentimes that's transformative for your business.
What's your kind of thoughts on kind of in-house people versus kind of agencies or freelancers there? Is it better to have people in-house, or is it better to have kind of expertise that kind of plug in?
It depends on your business. I think if you're a tech business, it's certainly that CTO and that tech oversight you should have in-house. I think, again, to my previous point, as you're starting up, particularly for the first couple of years, everything changes. It's really hard to keep a stable team because you're in a volatile environment, and what you do and how you do it and how you sell and who you sell to is always in flux. So I would say get freelancers and consultants over agencies, because if you get any form of agency, you're always going to be the last person that they want to work with, because your business model, what you can pay them, their business model just don't align. I'd get freelancers who have maybe come from good agencies because they've got all the experience and can deliver a lot more for a lot less overhead. I think for bringing on full-timers, bring people in on a contract first for 6-9 months and then put them on probation for a little bit, just to make really sure. They might be a great person, but they might not fit where the business might be in 6 or 9 months. And again, the mistake we made early days is we always felt that the number of full-time employees you had was a symptom of your success, and actually it's not. It's be really careful about bringing full-timers in. I think most of the time you can probably manage with a small number of full-timers with the right level of freelancers and consultants and offshore companies. Once you are secure that you've got a long-term role for them, then maybe start bringing people in. But it's hard when you're a startup because you don't want to pay for consultants. They feel a lot more expensive, but you can let them go a lot quicker, and your business will change. It won't be the same in 6 months as it is now.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I suppose, again, it's dependent on the recruitment or jobs market as well. Maybe 2 years ago, 3 years, go with COVID, then it's difficult to find people. Now potentially it's a bit easier to find people in terms of particular roles and people looking.
Yeah, it is. I think COVID was definitely the massive reawakening, and people decided that they wanted a bit more out of life. And so I think there's more people on the market who come from really interesting backgrounds, want to work in startups. That's great. I think the challenge is post-COVID and certainly post-Brexit, it's a bloodbath in terms of getting funding. And I think when people come out of interesting, I don't know, agencies, marketing agencies, corporate place where they come with expertise, oftentimes they don't necessarily look for a startup type salary. And I think that's a little bit of a tension there. There's great people, just no one can afford to use them at the moment. It's bleak out there.
Well, I suppose maybe kind of going a little bit deeper into that as well. Where do you see the kind of investment market? Do you think things will open up a little bit, or is it opening up in particular categories where anything is AI influenced, or how's it looking from your side?
So, I mean, it's totally it's so bleak. I think Brexit. I think whatever side of the fence you sat on with Brexit, I think we're still seeing catastrophic results of it that are still being felt day to day, and I think that comes from just operating expenses. I think from the barriers of working in Europe or getting stuff in and out of Europe. I think we've been cut off from a lot of talent in Europe. I mean, I'm working with a paint company at the moment, and just the complexities about not being in the EU, just in order to create their product, sell their product, it's just barrier after barrier after barrier. I think in terms of investment, it feels that investors are a lot more cautious. It feels a lot of the VCs actually don't have that much money at the moment, and they're in fundraising spirals as well. Weirdly, if you read the press, it feels like a very positive outlook at the moment, and UK VCs have got more money and investing more than anyone else in Europe, and I'm just not seeing that in the early stages. I think a lot of VCs are going for more cautious investments and certainly a lot of follow-ons. And I think what we're seeing on the ground is that startups are needing to, what would have been a 3 or 4 month raise 2 years ago is turned into 12, 14, 16 months. People are going through extensive amounts of due diligence and meeting after meeting after meeting. Terms are a lot more predatory than they used to be. So it's getting really hard. I think there's always going to be vanity themes with VCs and with investors. It was AI. I think anything that's got generative AI is doing really, really well. You always have the thing. So I think, anything that's got AI in it is probably going to have a bit more luck. 2 years ago, I'm trying to remember what the theme was, but there's always something. Crypto, there's a crypto bubble a couple of years ago. There'll be something else, I'm sure, next, but it can help.
I mean, the fact that you kind of specialize here in terms of a climate maybe focused business, is there a climate tech element which is a positive in terms of people trying to make a difference, but also a positive in terms of more opportunity and scope for funding in that way? Or is it still grim? Give me some positive outlook, Paul.
So the positive thing, so the positive thing is that there's a lot more funding going into climate focused VCs. So investment into climate is growing, good. We're end of September 2024. As a new Labour government, I think they're making a lot more noise about climate and sustainability than their predecessors. What that means in terms of fiscal support, I don't know, and I don't know what other. We're in quite a tight financial area, so I don't know what that's going to look like going forward. I think the challenges for any startup or any technology or scale up indeed that's working in the climate space, the market's opening up. There's a lot more demand for these types of solutions. Regulation is creating a nicer environment for them. Oftentimes, a lot of the VCs that are climate focused might be lower hanging fruit for them to go and get those investments. There's a lot of greenwashing. We see a lot of traditional funds that now have climate funds or ESG focus or ESG targets. And once you start going into due diligence, you realize that they're still operating a bit more like a traditional VC and want quick ROIs. I think the business model and the markets for climate focused startups and scale ups is quite different. You're going to have a slightly riskier market. Your product might be slightly more expensive. You are probably going to get that return 3 or 5 or 7 years, perhaps longer than your SaaS business or your crypto business or something else. And so I think there is a bit of the environment is still it's a good environment for climate. I think it's only going to get better, but I still think there's a bit of adjustment that needs to be made in terms of the return on investment and the private investment into climate startups. What we try and do, and as a company, our belief, our mission is that in order for a small company like us to have the impact on the environment and the world that we want to do, we have we're good at working with startups, we're good at working with founders and helping them create and scale businesses better than other people, we believe. And so the reason we pivoted to climate and sustainability focused companies is that if we can create a suite or a next generation of companies and solutions and technologies that are helping the environment, over time, their impact on the world will be much better than us working on fashion tech or SaaS or crypto businesses. And what we want, our benchmark for if we've done our job well, is that if we get an investor who literally couldn't give the slightest shit about the climate or the world, still sees a really interesting business model investment opportunity in a business that we've worked with and invest in them, that's kind of where we want to go to. I think we want to try and eliminate the invest because it feels like a good thing for the world. We want people to go, this is a brilliant business model and a solid founder that has great returns potential. That's why I'm putting my money into them.
Makes sense. Look, we've gone over time, and so fascinating. So much good information, content in there. Look, one kind of question I ask at the end of these sessions is, if you could, and kind of boiling it down, what's the one best piece of advice you could offer for that startup moving to a kind of scale up mode?
Probably over about 5. I think it still comes back to get away from your desk and go and speak to your customers. I think that for me is fall in love with your customer problems. Go and get on the front line, no matter how big you're getting. Go out and speak to the market. Go and try and sell your product to people that haven't heard of you before. Because I think the more you understand your customer, the more you can build around what they need and what they want. I think if you can do that, everything changes because you're getting closer to product market fit. Every single KPI and metric around business growth is supported by knowing your customer inside out. They'll probably think of a more powerful one later on, but that for me is just the one thing that Brits don't do. We don't go out and hustle enough. We don't go out and sell enough. We don't go out and speak to people enough. We take a very academic view on customer development. And I think that our friends across the pond in America are very, very good at speaking to customers and putting customers first. We aren't so much. And I think that makes the difference of accelerated growth.
Interesting. Well, good learn there. Get out of behind your desk, but also out of your home and go and see your customers.
Be more American.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, thank you so much. It's been great. And thanks, everyone. See you at the next session.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.